All right, so we are joined tonight by Patrick Beltran, the co-CEO of Puff Bar. Patrick, thanks for coming and joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys.
Of course. So, we chatted a little bit beforehand, and I was mentioning, people in my circle, that especially in this area, love the product, use the product a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess let's start off with kind of how you got involved with the company to begin with, and kind of to maybe timeline to where we are now, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the other.
Sure. So I've been in the vape industry for probably since like 2014, 2013, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And we originally started just kind of like wholesaling products from downtown. My partner at the time, he had a connection to one of the wholesalers in downtown, and they're all old school down there, So we had a good online experience. We were younger, we were more intuitive with like online e-commerce and stuff. So we decided to take some of these products online and try to sell them online. And so just working our way up to that point where we were just like, okay, now we want to start our own website, where we were kind of just like reaching out to people and trying to sell to shops and stuff. We eventually started our own website, which was eliquidstop.com. And then we ran that for about 3 years, and it started taking off, getting big traffic. We were up there with the top big vape websites, and it's still around today. So just kind of what came out of that and the relationships that we've built with distributors and other people within the industry is kind of how we got involved with Puff Bar. So Juul, back in 2018, Juul's been around since I think like 2014, 2015, something like that. But they really got popular in 2018. That's when they had their big blow up. That was like the device to have. And Juul did a really good job of popularizing vaping to the mass consumer market, because vaping was always kind of this like very niche, kind of vice, right? It was a good alternative for people to smoke, and it was kind of cool to some people. And there was like this whole thing. I remember like there was this brand called VGod, and they had these like VGod trick shows, and there was like a whole competition of like who could blow like O's the biggest, and they were like splitting O's down the center, and they would blow one O and it would go to like 20 O's, So there's a whole like culture really behind vaping, outside of it just being like a normal product that people are using to stop smoking, or something that's like quick and easy just to go out and, on a night.
Sure.
And vaping kind of got termed, or coined as like this douchebag thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
Like blowing like big clouds. You'd be like in a line somewhere and you just see like this huge cloud blowing in people's faces, So Juul did a really good job of innovating the space in the sense of bringing, a very usable device that was convenient for the user, to the mass consumer market. You're not blowing these big clouds. Their salt nicotine that they had made gave you a very similar result, that in comparison to a cigarette. And it doesn't require all these like steps, because of the mods. You had these batteries and you had, tanks and coils and juice bottles and stuff. So yeah, they got really popular in 2018. They had done a lot of shady marketing efforts in order to get there. And that's well documented, even internally. And, they would go to like schools and they would host like events, educating, children on like the negative effects of smoking and stuff. But, their name was obviously slapped to like their presentation. So indirectly, they're kind of like putting themselves in front of, an underage demographic. Behind, and really, I don't know what their true intention was, but I mean, I can only assume that, it's beneficial to them that if they're getting their name out there, regardless of like what their message is.
Yeah.
So they became very popular in 2018. I remember even from Eliquidstop, we were buying Juul products, and, Juul pods were going for like $9 wholesale. And then as the products became harder and harder to get, they were going for like $10 and then $14. I remember we even bought like wholesale Juul pods for like $20.
Wow.
And people were buying them for like $40. It was crazy.
Jeez.
So this craze just really blew up, and it really popularized the industry. But with the explosion of that craze brought a lot of negative heat that was not really around in the past, because everyone, like I said, looked at vaping as this kind of like niche, like leave them alone kind of thing. And vaping was, in the beginning, the Wild West. Like there was this brand called Cutwood, and I remember they started out of their garage, and they were making juices in their garage, and someone had found like a fly in one of their bottles of juice one time, just to show you kind of like how the industry really was at that time compared to like really how it's now in terms of the regulations. Juul became popular, and obviously the teen usage had increased amongst that. So regulators started taking aim at Juul, and they were like the only brand really at the time that was doing anything big. So the FDA came and they took off all the flavors for Juul, because that's where they deemed that was the most enticing thing to the underage usage, was the flavors. So when they had taken their flavors off, and to kind of go back to the point of like how crazy, the Juul pods in the sense of like the cost of those were, it was a highly demanded product, and that's why they went up so high, is because everyone was demanding these pods, and the supply was so so small. So when they had gotten all their flavors pulled off the market, Juul pods were a huge source of revenue for a lot of these smoke shops. I mean, like, these smoke shops were, selling Juul pods like no tomorrow. They were seeing like, okay, like I got to carry this product, and they were making a lot of money. A lot of people were making a lot of money off of Juul pods. So when their pods had got pulled off the market, there was a lot of innovation that was kind of going around. And what had happened was, since regulators don't really know, it's kind of like the gun issue, like regulators will ban something about the gun, but then there's like so many loopholes, like, oh, I got to just like add this little clip to this, or I add this little like metal piece and it'll like go around this ban, or whatever the case was. So there was a lot of innovation, in the devices themselves, but they had banned all the flavors in the language of the law. It was like any flavor that was contained inside a Juul pod itself, or it was like inside of a pod, was essentially banned. The FDA had put this like deeming regulation out. And so when they had banned the pods, essentially there was devices that were, starting to come up that, well, this is something that wasn't even like realized at the time when Puff Bar was coming around. But essentially, since our devices don't have any pod in them, they ended up not falling under the regulations of that law. Since this is essentially a device and it has like a cotton that's wrapped around like a coil. There's no like tanking kind of system in this. So essentially, Puff Bar was allowed, and other disposables at the time, but there was really not too many big competitors of Puff Bar at the time. But essentially, all disposable devices didn't fall under that regulation of where you weren't allowed to have any flavors. So Puff Bar had launched a bunch of flavors onto the market, and the flavors in disposables, like I said, have been around for a while. Like disposables were around, I think, like 2 or 3 years before Puff Bar even became popularized. But the disposables were always like very janky. They were always very cheap. The flavor was like horrible. Like they would always burn out. It was like they felt cheap. They were like these little plastic things. So they just never picked up steam. But then when Puff Bar came around, the flavor house that Puff Bar had found was amazing. Like the flavors that you would get, like you would hit the strawberry and it would taste like this like amazing strawberry, and you would hit this mango and it would taste like a juicy mango. So that really picked up steam, because what would happen was, the devices were very similar. The original Puff Bars were very similar to the shape of the Juul, because we did like the Juul device shape. It was like very similar and very sleek and very easy to put in your pocket, and it didn't feel bulky or anything like that.
So then, around what year was that?
That was around early 2020, late 2019. Okay, is when that. So, and keep in mind too, with Puff Bar, there was zero marketing effort. There was zero marketing effort behind pushing the brand out there, getting it out there. There was no billboards.
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing anything.
There was no billboards, no TV ads, no us going to schools and, like saying like, like don't smoke or whatever the case was. It was just a product that we had pushed through a distribution network that was very vast, and the people at the time, the distributors that were originally kind of brought this product onto the market, they had a huge distribution network. And it just kind of, everyone is kind of, and how that kind of works is like, hey, you guys got to all carry this product. And it was kind of like, you guys do me a favor by carrying this product and we'll carry one of your products. And that's how it kind of works a lot in the distribution like network of people. So everyone had carried the Puff Bar product and it just naturally picked up. Shops started getting it, and then consumers would go to the shop and be like, oh, what is this? And they would hit it and they'd be like, oh, this is amazing. And then word of mouth it like wildfire just blew up. And I think also as well, and I always tell people this, is the disposable, like at least in the Puff Bar and like the disposables today, we like to call it like a step system, right? So you have like your mods that are like a multi-step system, right? You need, in order for you to use that vaping device, like a big, honker thing. Sure. It's like a 5 or 6 step system, right? You need a tank, you need a coil, you need a charger, you need batteries, you need juice, and some other devices you need even more than that. Then you could break it down even to like a Juul, for example. A Juul we like to call like a 3-step system. So you still require 3 steps in order for you to use that device. You need pods, you need a device, you need a charger. Without one of those 3, you can't use the device. Sure. And then you could even break it down even further to a cigarette. which is a two-step system. You need a lighter and you need an actual cigarette. Where our devices, we like to call a one-step system. It's like the end of the road. Like you can't get any simpler than just you taking this product out of the packaging, putting it to your mouth and just using it.
Right.
So I think for that, in a lot of ways, is extremely convenient for the consumer because they're like, there would be like tons of times where we would hear about like, I lost my Juul or I lost this, because Juuls are like, they're so small. I mean, you just lose them. I mean, you just like, if you're drinking out at night or you're moving around so much, you just like forget where you put it. And the Juul devices at the time too were not cheap. So it was like, you lose your Juul device, you're like out like $60.
Dang, it was that much.
Well, I think it was like $35-$40 for the device. And then the pods are $15,
sure.
And then, so it's like, maybe it's like, depending on like if you like lost your pods or whatever,
right.
it could get to like the point where you're out $40-$50 every time, so you lose a puff bar, you're out like $15, it was like a lot easier thing for like, I think consumers to grasp onto of like, all right, these flavors are good. I don't have to worry about like upfronting a bunch of cost, and it's like super convenient. Like I don't need to like go charge it. I don't have to worry about like a lot of things to carry. I just got to go to the store and buy it, and I'm on my way. So I mean, I think the evolution of that is really what kind of blew up Puff Bar to the point of where it was crazy. I mean, it was like 1 month you're doing like, you're doing like 500,000 units. Then the next month it's like 1 million units. Then the next month it's like 10 million units, So I think the evolution of that was just like so crazy. So our involvement, at least at the beginning, was because Puff Bar was kind of ran like an empire, right? It was like, there was like a core people, and then like there was like these distributors that had a say, and then like there was like these people that had a say, and it was like kind of ran like a very like an empiristic style.
And this is in the beginning-ish.
And this was in the beginning, right? Because it required, I mean, Puff Bar, like Juul, for example, like they go and they get, millions of dollars worth of funding, to a certain point, they got billions of dollars worth of funding, so they had the infrastructure to build out crazy teams of people, Stanford or like Harvard, like all these like, crazy Ivy League, like, people that are on their teams, behind all these problems where it's like Puff Bar is like, these dudes in downtown and like, it's not, it wasn't built on the same infrastructure. So it was, our involvement was more on the retail end of things, right? So since we had an extensive retail knowledge in terms of online commerce, retail commerce, and a lot of their focus was on the distribution, like that's all they knew how to do was just distribution. We were missing a huge component of the brand, which was the front facing, right? Like the website, the getting the product to the retailer, the consumers that want to buy it online, that don't have access to it. The verification system. So we were more involved on the front end, where we allowed the other people to be more involved on the distribution because that's what their expertise was. So I think through that process, but as the brand grew so big, you started running into so many problems because when you have such a big brand growing such a rapid pace without any real infrastructure, you just run into problems. And there's not one person to blame. It was just that there was just no coordination between everyone. Everyone had a different idea of how to handle a problem, right? Like Nick and I, we had so many ideas on how to handle problems. And then they didn't have, that many ideas, but their ideas were always never like aligned with us. And we were a little bit more intuitive with, the technologies of today and like, the ways of business today, where, like I said, a lot of their mindset was a lot older school, like very flea market style, that kind of thing. So I mean, with the hyper growth of this brand, and you started running into all these problems. One of the biggest problems was the counterfeit issue, because as you're scaling production so fast, it's like you have a manufacturer in China, and they could produce, let's just say, 2 million units a month. And all of a sudden you're getting POs for 5 million units a month, 10 million units a month, whatever the number is, past whatever their capacity is. You're having to meet that demand, but they're not able to scale their operations as fast. So what happens is you end up subcontracting to different manufacturers in China. So like, for example, like it's like if one manufacturer is making the whole product line, it's like, okay, well, let's give these 5 flavors to this manufacturer and these 5 flavors to this manufacturer. And then as it's growing even more, then it's like, okay, well, let's give like only 2 flavors to this manufacturer, 2 flavors to this manufacturer. Now we got to find a different manufacturer to produce the other 2 flavors, right? So you run into a lot of problems with like quality control issues. The counterfeit thing was the biggest thing for us, because what happens is, when you're growing that big, it's so enticing because at one point Puff Bars were going for like at a wholesale price of $12, which was
really,
which was
wow.
at the peak. It was like it's almost like a stock in a way.
Yeah.
You know, it was like it got to a point where it just got so ridiculous that people just said like, I'm not screw this brand. I'm not buying this because
Sure.
a lot of what happened too was that there's a lot of greed as well. You know, in the controlling parties where they saw the demand was increasing. There's something called Chinese New Year that happens every year. And what happens is the manufacturing in China shuts down.
Right. It's like a week or something.
Yeah, it's like a week, but
yeah.
it's like such a ripple effect on like how everything is kind of like done, which leads to production issues and delays, especially when you're trying to move such high volumes. You know, a week or 2 weeks like sets you back almost like a month of production. So then what happens is then you have such a low demand of product, but everyone's wanting it. And when you have greedy people that don't really understand the longevity of like how a business should operate in terms of the relationship with your clients, you start price gouging, right? Everyone starts price gouging. So then it's like, oh, well, I could sell it for like $7. And then it's like, oh, dang, I need a mango puff bar right now, or I need banana ice puff bar right now. Well, only one distributor has because they bought a huge stock of it that they still have left over and no one else could get it. So then it's like, well, I'm going to up my price $2, you know, and then everyone's like, I got to buy it, you know? And then it would be like one of these things where it's like, I bought it at $2 above what it normally is supposed to cost. And then next week it comes in stock everywhere and everyone's like pissed because they're like, what the hell? Like I just bought it for $7 and now it's back to $5, you know? So there's a lot of like retail problems as well as the counterfeit issues, because then what happens is the pricing was so high and demand in the US, all these counterfeiters and, you know, some of these people that had control over our production in terms of having the raw materials already, right? They have them, you know, like because they're making the authentic products for us. They're like, well, you know, we could reach out to some of these distributors, some of these retailers in the United States and sell them authentic products. And the biggest problem too is we were using a coding system, which is kind of flawed, but it was like the best idea that we had at the time, which is essentially it's a sheet and you make like million codes on an Excel sheet. You send it to your Chinese manufacturers. I need you to make 1 million stickers with these codes on there to put on the back of these puff bars.
Oh, I remember, and then you could track it online or something.
Yeah,
right? To see if it's authentic.
Yeah, there was like a scratch system.
Yeah, I
there
remember
was like
that.
a scratch system on the back, and you were able to scratch it and then go into type it in, and all it did was cross-reference the code on the sheet. But the problem with that is that like first of all, you're giving them to your manufacturer. You're not controlling how they're getting put on, and you're trusting this manufacturer, which you might trust your main manufacturer, but I don't know if I could trust these sub manufacturers. Like, what incentive do they have? You know, so then what they start doing is, there's you know, production problems. We had a loss of X amount, or you know, there was so much like moving parts going on at the time that it was like, you know, we weren't really keeping track of the stickers, and like we were just sending them codes, and they tell us to send them codes and stuff like that. So then they would produce authentic puff bars essentially, because they were putting them on their own, saying it was like a loss, and then they would backdoor them and they would sell them as like an authentic like product. So there's a lot of backdooring, a lot of problems like that started, you know, kind of creeping up on us, and it's tough too because you're dealing with so much. You know, there's production issues, retailer issues, you know, then you start getting into the point where you're becoming this big brand again, or you're becoming this big brand. And then same thing as Juul, you start getting into like regulatory issues, public perception issues. And then internally you start becoming, I mean, when you have so many big problems, you know, and you have so many chiefs and not enough Indians, it's like everyone's just fighting on what the best thing to do is. And then when that happens is you just never get to get anything done. You know, everyone had a solution on how to do this. Everyone had a solution on how to do all this. And then like, it's just like, there's so much bickering. And, you know, the thing is too, is some of these things cost a lot of money, and someone, you know, maybe they don't want to like allocate the funds to doing this, you know? So there was a run of about, I think like 9 to like 11 months of like where Puff Bar had like a really strong life cycle of getting big. And then it just
I remember that too.
Yeah. And then the thing was too, is the PMTA was a thing. It started coming around. So the PMTA application is this application. So the FDA got jurisdiction over all tobacco products back in 2008 by Obama. So he granted the FDA. So prior to that, they didn't have any jurisdiction over any tobacco products.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They were fighting for it, and it had to be an amended thing by Congress or the president. Either or could, you know, amend, you know, like what the FDA's control is and over what products. But essentially, the FDA had gotten jurisdiction over all tobacco products.
Okay.
And when that happened, they were starting to, you know, regulate tobacco products, but then vaping had kind of came in around like 2012, like 2011 is kind of when it first started in its baby stages. But they didn't really pay any focus to it because it wasn't a big thing. And then eventually they had seen that vaping was like this like thing that was coming up. So they had their solution to the vaping thing was, okay, well, first of all, no one really knew what the actual health benefits were. I mean, everyone kind of like assumed logically that there was health benefits, or it was like a better alternative to smoking cigarettes. But it was really like still unknown of like what the effects was. And there was like these like things that would come out that was like popcorn lung was like this one.
There's like one person or something, right?
Yeah, it's like and this is not how like to be honest, this is how most of the news is, and even kind of just being on the back scenes and taking a lot of the bluntness of like press and like negative presses that it's just like they just blow up and they look in on one issue and then they turn that into an issue that's like almost like a non-issue.
Right.
Whereas like popcorn lung was like a flavoring that was. So like they got the term popcorn lung because essentially it's a flavoring. It was a butter flavoring that they had used in a popcorn facility. Like the flavoring started in like a popcorn facility, and they would use it into their butter popcorn to give it like a buttery flavor.
Okay.
But what had happened in those factories was someone had gotten like because they've been around the chemical so much that people started inhaling it, and it would give someone what's like called a popcorn lung, and it has something to do with like your lung not being able to like take in enough oxygen or something like that. It messed with your lungs. So that's how it got popcorn lung. But what had happened is they had started putting that flavoring inside of vapes, vape juices. So it was a very rare case. I think it was like one, maybe two cases from what I remember.
Yeah,
but I mean, it was a flavor that was widely used. But then there was like happened to just be this case that like just kind of like it blew up like, oh, like vaping is going to give you popcorn lung and stuff like that. And it was like really like such a narrow issue. It was like off of just this popcorn flavoring, and even off that popcorn flavoring, it was only like one, I guess, or two cases. So it was like very small, but it was like one of those things that got kind of blown up and like blown out of proportion, and it made the vape industry look bad. So then the FDA started kind of looking at the whole industry as a whole, like, okay, well, we got to start regulating this, and even the packaging and stuff like that back in the day. I mean, the packaging, and this is something I don't agree with, what is that, the packaging back in the day was crazy. It was wild. Like, you used to see like there was this company called, I think it was like Candy King. And they became popular because what they did was they took all the brands of candy, like Swedish Fish, Sour Patch Kids, Sour Worms, and they had like changed like the like some of the imagery a little bit, and they had changed some of the names. Like there was like batch. They had like a batch flavor, and it was basically a Sour Patch, and like the whole box, like it was like you could 100% tell that they were trying to like show that it was like a Sour Patch Kid. Sure. It looked exactly like the same, pretty much. So it was pretty wild, and like there was like no warning labels like blasted right on the front. There was like crazy flavors, and like everything actually did look like, some people even like came out with like candy looking like packaging and stuff like that. So I think eventually, like as the FDA started kind of getting more and more negative, stuff coming out of the vaping industry, they're like, okay, we got to start really regulating this because this is like getting kind of out of control here. So then they came out with what's called the PMTA, which is, it's an application that essentially every vape company has to, like, it got fought for a while, but it was an application to where the FDA is like, okay, if you guys want to sell vape products on the market, you have to submit your products through this process. And this process is, we're going to review all of the stuff that's required through this process. And it was also skewed too, because it was one of the requirements for this process was your product had to be on the market pre-August 8th, 2016.
Okay.
So, I mean, the majority of the industry wasn't on the market pre-August 8th, 2016. And keep in mind too, the vaping industry was evolving super fast. Every month there was like a new device that did something crazy, got smaller, got this, it was like this wild thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously my theory is on a lot of what happens at the higher level is that there's a lot of, big tobacco lobbying for certain things. They've been lobbying their public, the politicians for years, trying to like give favorable laws. So it was like very weird that they chose like an August 8th, 2016. I wasn't exactly sure, and I still don't know to this day how they came up with that exact date. But essentially every product after that, it essentially had no chance to even like be a brand anymore or be a product. So it was almost like it was like an unfair advantage. But people still, those like vape lobbyists and like vaping organizations that had fought it and pushed it back and pushed it back and pushed it back. But essentially that's what it was. And then on top of that, it was very expensive. For every SKU, we've gotten quoted like for anywhere between like $1 million to $3 million a SKU. So for a company
to go like the application process.
Yeah. So the application process is like it's it's not only just like just to file. The application filing fee is not that crazy. I mean, it's still expensive relative to like, so with some of these brands like we're able to afford, but it's all of the research and everything that needed to go into the application to make it like a legitimate application that's going to have a potential to pass. So it's like if you want to have a fair shot at running, it's like you need, it's like someone like in a marathon race that's like training by themselves, or you have like Usain Bolt like training you. You know, it's like they want you to have this application that is going to be this extensive thing. It needed like clinical trials. They wanted to see like toxicology reports. Wow. They wanted to see like a marketing strategy of how your products are not going to be marketed to kids. You know, so it was like this whole extensive thing. But a lot of people in the vape industry at the time, this was like a process that's built for, you know, $100 million, you know, plus dollar companies, you know, that have the money to be able to set aside for this. But smaller brands and smaller companies, like they don't have $1 million just to fork up. And that's for one SKU. So these companies.
So it's like for that one, it'd be like that.
Yes, this for one SKU. But this is like, it's like its own device. It's like a one shot. I mean, there's companies out there, like, for example, that like these nicotine juices, right? You have like 0 mg, a 3 mg, a 6 mg.
So each one is $1 million.
Yeah, for one flavor, for each of those, it's like just those like 4 SKUs, you know, it's like super expensive. So this process, it was tough, but it kept getting pushed back and kept getting pushed back and kept getting pushed back. But as you know, Juul got popular and then they got hit, and then Puff Bar started rising, and then it was like, all right, we need to start like getting something going here, because it's like the FDA was really like kind of like didn't really have a lot of control or a lot of grasp on like what was going on. You know, they would plug one hole and then, you know, like another product, and like a lot of people like to call us like the loophole brand, you know, but it's essentially like Puff Bar wasn't built with the intention of being a loophole. It just so happened that this product came out and it just ended up being a part of, like, I guess the loophole that was there, but it was
unintentional.
It was unintentional, you know. And so what had happened is that so all this stuff was just kind of like just building up, and then eventually the FDA was sending out letters to everyone. They were just going like, hey, your products are not allowed to be on the market. All the big brands, you know, because essentially your product was already deemed illegal by them because it was not pre-August 8th, 2016. And this PMT application was essentially, they were giving like extensions, but you had to essentially get this marketing order from them in order to continue to sell your product. And then there was like a deadline to submit applications, which was like September of last year. And then September of this year is when they closed like the 1 year extension. So if you submitted your application by September of, I think it was like 2020, then you got like a 1 year extension to submit to keep selling until the next September.
Sure.
So before all of that happened, there was a lot of, like I said, internal, you know, turmoil. That we had internally just decided, everyone was like, you know what, there's too much heat. We're just going to pull off the market. Like everyone's just like, it's just getting too bad for us. There was too many things going on. And it was just like, okay, this was a good run. That's it.
And there was a period of time where you guys were, right? It was like a few months or something.
No, right? we were off the market for like, I want to say like 8 months.
There you go. 8 months,
yeah, like 8 to 10 months, you know, something like that. But Nick and I, we had so many solutions in our head to a lot of these problems that were like going on. And no one wanted to really like keep pushing it. You know, everyone was like so scared of everything. And then Nick and I, we weren't really scared of anything, because we always felt like we were always staying, you know, like good behind the brand. We always had good intentions. You know, so we, through negotiations, ended up acquiring all of the portfolio of the Puff trademarks throughout the 8-month hiatus. And in that time too, strategizing on like how we're going to come back, and like, you know, where's Puff Bar going to be aligned if we can't sell tobacco products anymore. So through that process, we had come across a product, it's a synthetic nicotine, which we use in our products now.
The salt nicotine?
No, so it's a synthetic.
That's different.
So like I said, so the FDA has jurisdiction over all tobacco products, and that's how it's written in the language of the law. A synthetic nicotine is not derived from tobacco. So what a lot of people don't know is there's nicotine found in other types of agricultural products outside of just the tobacco plant. Like tomatoes, potatoes, you know, stuff like that. So what you're able to do is, it's not in high amounts. So like, you know, in traditional tobacco nicotine, they like kind of like how weed is extracted or cannabis oil is extracted. You know, they grind it up and then they put it through like some kind of like acid bath or whatever. But synthetic nicotine is extracted from like a, you know, like a tomato or something like that. And I'm not exactly sure on the full chemical process. But then what they do is they take that molecule and then they build on top of it, you know, and they engineer it in a lab. I mean, the nicotine itself is still a 1-to-1, so it's actually 100% pure compared to no nicotine that's found in any vape juice that's derived from tobacco could ever say that they're 100% pure. So one of the benefits of synthetic nicotine is that there's no residual impurities. So when you extract the tobacco in the traditional way, it's still going to have some kind of trace amounts, even at the molecular level, of that tobacco, remnants in there, which we like to call the residual impurities, as well as some taste factors still left in, where synthetic nicotine is flavorless and it's actually a little smoother. So a lot of people feel like it's like a little bit smoother. And then the taste profile is a lot better as well. And then it's also has the potential to be a better for the environment in the sense of the carbon footprint, because you don't necessarily need to have so much agricultural waste in the sense of, people aren't growing. Tobacco is not like an avocado where you're just like, you're getting like health benefits off of it. You're strictly growing tobacco to put it into like vape juices or into a cigarette. So like if you could not waste all the water on doing that and have a different method of extracting that nicotine, because all it's grown for is the nicotine inside. Really, it's not for the plant itself. It could potentially leave a better carbon footprint on the environment. So coming back into the market, we had come across the synthetic nicotine, and synthetic nicotine has been in the market for a while. It just never became popularized because it's very expensive to do compared to traditional tobacco nicotine. So no one is like ever like, I mean, you did get a little better taste. You got a little bit of like a smoothness. But yeah, it was so expensive that it just didn't make sense for a lot of people. And it's almost like 15 times the cost.
Wow.
Yes. And it gets better as you scale production and stuff like that. But since it's not popularized, it's like that was the going rate, because it's like there wasn't a lot of demand for it. So it's like they only made small amounts of it. And then until recently, they had reached out to us and we had kind of done our research and like, okay, well, let's do it. And this allows us to stay on the market because it's not under the FDA's jurisdiction. So it's like, okay, well, it's a better product and it's not under FDA's jurisdiction. Let's roll with this product. So then in February, we had taken full control over everything of this year. And we had, developed our new tobacco-free nicotine, as we like to call it, puff products. So that's been kind of a wild ride throughout that whole process. And we're dealing with a lot, and what sucks is that, and this is kind of why I'm here now and why I've been in, various, news sources, is because, we're dealing with a lot of the problems in the past that weren't always in our full control. Like the whole distribution, that was like out of our control, because we're on the front end handling the retail and the brand development of, the front end of the, the packaging and stuff. We're not dealing with like the distribution because that was all of the other people. But we're having to answer for that a lot of the times, which makes it tough, because it's like when people always ask us, like, they always want to know the history of Puff. And it's always tough asking us because we're never involved fully in all of the aspects like we are now. Like right now we control all of the aspects of everything. But in the past, it's like we don't know who they were distributing to. Like, and I can't answer for that, know. I could speculate, but I'm not going to speculate on your behalf because, a lot of the narratives too, and like a lot of the prerogatives is like they want to look at you negatively. So they make you look like this shadowy thing. But coming back in now, it's been a little bit of a struggle because we've been having to answer for a lot of the past. And we're always like, yeah, we understand the perception that Puff had in the past. It was like, we get it. Like, and we're not happy about it, and we knew taking over full control of this brand that like it had that past,
You'd inherit that.
It inherits it, but that's not a representation of who we are now. And that's like been the biggest message we've been trying to get across. And it's been the hardest thing, because coming back, we're having to answer, like I said. And the biggest issue too, and I know this is something we're going to talk about, but is the counterfeits. So during that time, that Puff was taking the hiatus, and it was already an issue while Puff was still on the market. But during that time, while we had pulled off, counterfeits, because there was still a demand for Puff, and consumers weren't really aware of like what really counterfeits were. I mean, like the thing is too is right, the Joe Schmo that only buys vapes every Friday before he goes out with his buddies drinking or whatever the case is, and he sees Puff Bar on the shelf, always sees Puff Bar on the shelf. he's not like doesn't care about like authenticating it
Yeah.
or whatever. He just opens it and uses it and throws it away,
Yeah.
right? So as long as he sees Puff Bar on the shelf, he's like, oh, I guess it's an authentic product.
Yeah.
It's a real product.
You would assume because the smoke shop is selling it.
Yeah, it's a smoke shop selling it. It says Puff Bar on there. Like it's got the sticker on the back, but I'm not going to go and like type in this code and do all this stuff. You know, it's like it's a real product or whatever. But I think over time, I think two things happened. Is I think consumers started just kind of getting aware that like Puff was off the market. And then second was that, you know, shops, it was harder to get the product because it wasn't being distributed from, you know, Puff Bar anymore. Mm-hmm. It was only being distributed through distributors that were willing to take the risk on selling counterfeit products, as well as, you know, China getting stuck with a lot of the raw materials, because when Puff Bar had pulled off, China got left with a lot of raw materials. Because you got to think, we're not just buying materials as we're ready to produce. We're like forecasting our raw materials, because battery cost is like one thing that is like always fluctuating, and that's the most expensive part of the device.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, like when Tesla was coming around and Tesla's ramping up production, Tesla's buying up all the battery materials in China. So then that increases the cost, you know, so you're trying to get ahead of all of these cost increases and cost hikes. So counterfeits started like becoming this issue, and shops were starting to buy counterfeits. But I think over time is the shops that were not able to buy the authentic Puff products, they didn't want to buy counterfeits, or it was just so harder to get now because they're actual authentic distributors, or we're not carrying our products anymore because we had still good relations. We don't want them to carry like, you know, fake products or whatever the case is. So then they stopped buying it. So when people go into the shop, they're like, oh yeah, let me get a Puff Bar. It's like, oh no, they went out of business.
But we have this one instead.
Yeah, we have this one instead. But then that narrative started echoing, right? It was like a compounding effect. Like every month, you know, more and more people started like going into the shops, and the shops kept telling them, oh no, they're not around anymore. And then two, I think back to the first point is consumers started getting smarter, because it's not so much they were getting smarter, but the products that were counterfeit, China they're cutting corners in order to get the cost so low.
Oh, it's bunk. I mean, I don't know if this issue was happening when you guys were on it and they had authentic ones, but I remember going to stores with like my friends, and they would walk in, they'd get a Puff, and they would always tell them, well, there was a period of time where they started saying, open it up, try it here. Yeah. Before. Did they do that before? Like when you guys were in the market normally?
No, they never did.
They didn't, right? So because I remember going before they would buy it, and they didn't say anything. But then I remembered several times after, whenever, I guess it was this period of time when you guys pulled out, they would go, they'd buy whatever. And this isn't just like in LA. Like this happened in Vegas. This happened in San Diego. I went to different places, and each place before, like my buddy would buy, and they would say, hey, give that a shot, because if it doesn't work, at least you're here, we'll do it. But if you walk out the door and it doesn't work,
because you don't know if they're swapping it with their old one or whatever the case is.
And I was like, dang, this is shady, man. It's bunk. And at that point, you don't know when is it real, when isn't it. And I would have friends that would have it. They'd be like, man, this lasted like 10 minutes, and now it's burning like plastic, or now it's not even doing it, died or whatever. Yeah. And I was wondering, what the heck's going on?
I mean, a lot of that too is like quality control. So there's a couple things that happened, at least in the counterfeit realm, that led to a lot of like the negative perception about the brand that they had tarnished. So one of the things was that they cut the battery costs. So the one way they did this was they would put smaller batteries in the devices. So for example, our Puff Bar, the smallest one, had a 280 milliamp battery. Our Puff Plus had a 550 milliamp battery, and then our Puff XXL at the time had like a 850 milliamp battery. So, and then obviously those prices they're able to demand more from the consumer because the more puffs it had, you know. So those devices like the Puff XL selling like for $25, $20. But what these counterfeiters were doing was they were putting like 280 milliamp batteries in the Puff XXL, 500 milliamp. And I told you the price of the batteries is the biggest cost of the device. So they're like able to incentivize people in the United States to buy Puff XXLs for so cheap because they offered them such a cheap price. But that's because they were cutting corners in a lot of like, you know, those kind of situations where that's why some people would like, I bought this and I only got like 20 hits out of it, or I got 100 hits out of it, you know, and it's supposed to have like 1,000 or whatever the case was, as well as the quality control. I mean, we had a batch recently that we had run through production, and, you know, we were expecting the batch to come in, and they were like, oh, we did quality control. None of the devices were hitting properly because everything is like soldered and wired together. And if sometimes like there's like a messed up on the circuit board or whatever the case is, then they have to redo production, or they have to like toss all that material out and do it again. But counterfeiters, they don't care. They're just like pumping them out. You know, they're not like quality control testing them. They're not like, they're trying to maximize as much money as they can. They don't care if it's like not working or not. So I think over time, the brand's reputation started getting diminished, not only from a word of mouth perspective, from the shops telling them that Puff Bar is, banned or whatever the case was, but also from like actual like usability of the device and like their perception of how like the quality of the Puff Bar brand is actually what they're putting out. So that started leading into like a lot of negativity, at least coming back too, because like you almost like, I mean, it's getting a little better now because we're doing a lot more efforts of reaching out to shops to like, be like, hey, we're back. But you go back like 4 months, you ask anybody, oh, Puff Bar is banned, Puff Bar, it's not around anymore. It's all counterfeits, it's all fakes, and for the most part it was. But yeah, I mean, like to now we have, we have a whole new authentication system. Our juice is completely different. Our devices, we've redone every device, so no old device that's on the shelves that's made by any counterfeit is the same now. So I mean that's kind of where we're at now. We're back. We're doing our best to change the perception of the teen issue, which as I know is like the number one hot topic now. We're just trying our best really to get that brand back to where it was. But
so the resolution though seems like it was that you guys got full reign. It seems like that's what's been able to and kind of start to turn the tide a little bit, is because now you were mentioning there were parts of it like you couldn't even answer, like, hey, what's going on here? It's like, I don't know, there's so many people involved. But now that it's you and your partner only.
Yeah, I mean, like we have no problem like answering for everything that we're doing.
Because now.
But it's like Puff Bar did this. It was like, well, I didn't really control that aspect of the brand back in the day. So I can't really answer on that. It is also, we were so disconnected because it wasn't like we were in a room constantly discussing. It was like through a network of people and everyone kind of just discussing.
And they're in a different country too, right? They're in China, some of them.
So the manufacturers in China, and then, distributors are kind of like a broad network. So it's like so many different people in so many different places trying to coordinate at such a high level. It's like, it's not going to happen, and everyone thinks that they're chief. And it's like, so it's really hard. But I mean, it was really hard to handle a lot of problems like that as well. A lot of greed as well back in the day. But yeah, coming back now, we have full control, so it's a lot easier to manage the different aspects. I mean, it's harder in a lot of ways too, because when you build a brand as big as it was, it's easy when you have a lot of your own personal network, because we were handling the front end development, but we had our own little team just developing like the front end and running the website. Mm-hmm. And then you had the distributors, and they had their whole little teams doing their website, but they weren't like working together, So a lot of that has been solved now. So everything, but I mean, it's also tough too, because now we're having to take on a lot of roles that we weren't used to taking on in the past. But yeah, I mean, and it's like, again, it's like trying to change that public perception of who we really are now compared to like what Puff Bar was in the past.
Yeah. So I guess you mentioned, and we briefly touched on like the teenagers, the kids side of it. When we were talking before this, like we were talking on the phone, and I was telling you my personal take on it is, I understand like on the parents' side or like a teacher side, whatever, their concern being, doesn't matter if it's a better alternative to cigarettes, it's still like a smoking product. It's still something you're inhaling. It's still going to your lungs. So I understand the side of it where like, I don't want kids getting even the impression of this is a better thing versus like, just don't do it, period. I understand that. But what I don't see is like how you can draw the line where you just ban it for people that are of age to decide whether they want to do it or not. Like, I don't know what the current rules here are, but I remember there was a period of time where like the city of Burbank, or was it the county of LA? I forgot how it was defined. Like, they couldn't sell flavored products, not just puff, like any flavored stuff like that. And to me, what I don't get is, but why are we cherry picking flavored tobacco? Why are we still selling booze? So we can sell booze. We can have flavored booze. They have the coloring. And I was telling him, like, we sell cookies. Why can't we buy kids? That stuff's marketed to kids. Childhood obesity isn't exactly a joke of a problem.
I mean, and I think there's like something that like's been said for a while. It's like sugar's almost more addictive than heroin, or something crazy.
It's
like,
not good for you either way. Crazy, but that's okay to get. So, and again, that a kid can buy. A kid, and because the flack you guys like that'll come to Puff or the companies that sell these things is, it's because of them that kids are getting their hand on it. You guys aren't selling it to kids though. You guys sell it to a smoke shop, and then at that point, it's out of your hands.
Yeah,
you're selling it to them with the expectation of they're going to be law-abiding sellers and sell it to people that are over 21?
Yeah,
over here?
It's 21.
Over 21.
Yeah, 21. Yeah.
So I don't see why I understand why they blame it on someone, but still, I don't agree with it.
No, and I don't agree with it either. It's a very tough issue to like really address, at least coming from so first of all, you said, kids smoking puff or any kind of nicotine product is horrible. Like, I think that's like I don't want to see a 15-year-old person like with a vape device. Like that doesn't incite any kind of like positive feeling inside of me, right? But it's also tough too, because on the flip side, there's so many adult consumers that one have been proven to be a sustainable way of switching off of traditional smoking of cigarettes, where flavors is, you know, a proven way of having the majority of those people kind of switch over to the vaping world rather than having just like a tobacco or menthol flavor or whatever the case is. So I think you're trying to balance the two, right? It's like the kids smoking rate has gone down, but their vaping rate has gone up. And I think it's such a sensitive issue because everyone is so passionate, I think, about the way, I mean, like, I think the perception of how that is and the actual use of that. But I think there's so many different ways that people feel like that is the cause of that, right? So for me, I mean, it's tough because I don't believe that the cause of that, of kids vaping in such a high amount, is flavors. You know, I mean, I think it could play a certain role to a certain extent. You know, I think that'd be ignorant to say it doesn't. But anything could be enticing to someone, right? I said, and I told you on the phone, there's the number one. So it's the CDC themselves. There's a study that they did, or it's not even, it's just like a poll or some kind of research survey that they did. Number one substance abused amongst youth is alcohol. That is the number one substance abused. I mean, you could go to the CDC's website right now and look at it. That's like fact check me on that all day. The White Claws and the Trulies of the world, and so the seltzers, we like to call that the disposables of the alcohol world.
That's a good analogy.
Because the disposables the seltzers just came out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Every brand is jumping on the seltzer game, right? And all of these seltzers taste amazing. They have alcohol content, and they're at every high school party. I could guarantee you, you know, that has alcohol at that party, there will be a seltzer there with flavoring.
For sure.
You know, but it sucks that the vaping industry is getting all of the heat for their flavors. But one, we're not the most abused substance amongst youth. Two, there's been more deaths by alcohol by a way higher margin than the deaths by any nicotine. I to be honest, I haven't done my full research, but I have yet to see a death by someone vaping a nicotine product that's been underage. The worst thing that happened to the vape industry at the time was the deaths that people were vaping, but it was the THC oil. There was like THC oil. So what had happened there was the THC distillate, you know, they cut it down and they extract all of the distillate from the weed. That's when they put it in the cartridges. But a way to amplify the amount of volume of the distillate that you have is people were putting vitamin E acetate oil into the oil. So it was like, you know, it's kind of like cutting cocaine with baking powder. You know, it's not giving you any effect, but it's kind of like expanding the amount of product that you have. So it turns out that you're not supposed to be vaping vitamin E acetate oil, and people were dying because of this. And I think that shows two things. It's like, one, that's what happens when you allow a black market to happen and you don't allow an industry to like be regulated and to be legalized. Like in California, like you have legal vaping cartridges in California. You know, there's no reason to have fake vaping cartridges like that. But a lot of the deaths, if you look at where all the deaths were in states that had banned weed altogether. So you get a lot of that aspect from it. You know, two, it was the problem with that happened with us, and we got a lot of the flack from all of this deaths. And I say us as like in the vaping industry, because people just say like, oh, there's vaping. You know, but everyone thinks vaping is just nicotine vaping. You know, you could vape anything. But yeah, in that case, it was the THC oil. So that also amplified and threw a lot of, you know, fuel on the fire for the kid issue, because now people are like, oh, what, my kids could die off of like vaping this stuff. You know, it's tough because then you're like, okay, well, this is an issue. Kids vaping is an issue, but what is the root cause of these issues? Really, you know, it's like, okay, is it the flavors? Is it the distribution? Is it the retailers? Our take on it is that there's two problems that allow teens en masse to get vaping products. One is the lack of enforcement and restriction on people that have tobacco license. You know, like you said, we sell to a distributor or a retailer, and then those retailers, if they sell to kids, they sell to kids, right? But we're not there holding their hand or in every shop that's selling it. Our confidence in selling to these people is that they're licensed by the states in which they're operating in, right? California has the most amount of people out of any state. And to get a tobacco license, it takes 2 weeks and it's $265. and you get a tobacco license like that. And no background checks, no nothing, But, hey, the state of California deems this retail shop an eligible person to sell a tobacco product. So us as a manufacturer of these products, I'm looking at this and be like, okay, they're licensed. Like,
so I can sell to them.
Like California thinks these guys are legit, right? They're not going to sell to kids. So if I sell to a retail shop, like the product could be the most enticing product ever. But if the retail shop is doing the job and not selling these products to the consumers, because someone walks in, it's not like they're just grabbing stuff off the shelf and walking out, right? It's like no shop wants that. So how are they getting these products from these retail shops, right? Like even being in Glendale, like I grew up around here. Like it was no problem for me to go down to the smoke shop. Like I remember there was a story. I was going to a Glendale smoke shop, and I had bought like joint papers or rolling papers back when I was younger. And I went in there and I was like scared to ask him, and the guy was like, and I kind of was like pointing to it, and I was kind of looking at it. He goes, "What do you want?" He goes, "What do you want?" He goes, "Tell me like a man what you want." And I'm like 16 here, and he's like, "Tell me like a man, what do you want?" And I'm like, "All right, I'll take the rolling papers right there." He's like, "Okay, there you go." See, it was almost like he was putting me to the test of So I think that's where a lot of the problem lies, is that there is a lot of that in mass, but how am I supposed to weed through that? Because at least now with Puff, you have to submit you have to submit your tobacco license, your business license, your EIN, even some more documents. So if you upload those stuff and we got those, that's on you now, and that's on the government to enforce these.
You've done your part at that. That's what I'm like, you guys did your part.
And that's the thing, is we've done our part, and I feel, and I think they have done a study where the majority of these the consumers that are underage, they're getting them from secondhand or the smoke shops. They're not getting them from directly from the brand or the retail. I think it was 5% of people get their products online that are underage. So I think that's one big problem, right? Is that you have to really stop, and you have to really push the governments to enforce the retailers to make it not worth their while to sell to kids, and that's what I always tell people too. It's 100% from a moral perspective, Puff Bar does not want to sell or see any products in the underage, demographic of using them, but from a business perspective as well, that is not good business to see and have these kids using these products, because look at the flack that we're getting from this, right? So what, I'm making an extra $1 million a year potentially from, maybe underage users buying these products, from the smoke shops. But then I have a $2 million bill from my lawyer fighting all these, cases. It doesn't make sense, So it's we have to also do our part in making sure it doesn't get into it, and which we do, which is a lot of it vetting the shops. But if if the shops aren't willing to comply with that stuff, and they're willing to make the easy money, then it's that's where the government needs to step in and really put the gas on the enforcement here. I think in California, if you get caught selling to an underage user, first of all, there's 6 warnings with fines before you actually get. It's 5 or 6 before you actually lose your license.
Really?
Yes.
I'm surprised in California. I would have assumed they were
It's crazy. And the first fine is $235. The second one is $700. The third one is $2,000. It's like something like that, where it's
I'm surprised.
it's almost I'll take the risk, in my opinion. It's for these shops, I can only assume what they're thinking. They're what
are the odds I get caught?
If they're already willing to not have to break the law and just go after the money rather than following their moral compass and making sure that kids don't get it. It's obviously they're it's just I'll take the risk. The fines are low. So that's definitely one issue. The other issue is the counterfeit issue, because a lot of the counterfeits are the products that are tarnishing our name and getting into the hands of kids, in my opinion. And how those products are getting into the hands of kids is because you could go to, like I told you, DHgate, Alibaba, these Chinese portal websites, and get in touch with the manufacturer in China, and you reach out to them. Super easy. You could see it right now. Go to DHgate, type in Puff Bar, anybody that's listening, and you could see all of the counterfeit Puff products in there. You could go and order those, have them shipped directly to your door in bulk. Not a problem.
I had heard this already too, by the way. So it's it's known.
It's a known thing, yeah. And you could be 15 because there's no age gating on this. The product comes in, it gets shipped to the door. Do you think China cares about your age, or they're asking for your ID or whatever? No, they don't care. So you could be a 15-year-old person, take your parents' credit card or use someone else's that's 18's credit card, go on DHgate, buy these Puff Bars at an extremely cheap price in bulk, with $100, 100-piece MOQ, which is nothing. And then you go and sell them at high schools. You go and sell them to your friends. You sell them in the black market. I know TikTok was a huge problem for us. there was like the keyword puff bar on TikTok. There was 246 million views on all videos with tag puff bar.
Holy crap!
And that's just puff bar. There's like Puff Plus that has like 126 million.
Jeez,
so
that's nuts.
And these people are blatantly selling on TikTok. Like these underage people, they're selling on TikTok and they're like showing you like we ship discreetly, and they're like putting them in like candy wrappers and like things that like, so when you ship to your house, it doesn't look like you're ordering a vape device, you know.
Jeez.
And this is like a problem, right? It's like, keep in mind too, Puff Bar has no social presence. We have no Facebook, we have no Instagram, we have no YouTube, nothing. For a while, we didn't even have a LinkedIn. There was like 5 Puff Bar companies on LinkedIn, and we had to fight LinkedIn to get our actual company page, you know, like back. So that's like a lot of the issue too, is because again, to me, it's like the government needs to step in, right? It's like, if you have a problem with these products entering the market, right? Why isn't there some kind of system where, okay, if you have a license to manufacture, right, or some kind of license, if that product comes in and it's found to be like a vaping product, okay, well, does it match the delivery address? Does that company or the address that's being shipped to have a license to be able to import this product, right? There's nothing like that. No, it just comes through and it gets processed and cleared through customs, and it gets shipped straight to whoever ordered it. I'm telling you, it's that simple. It's crazy, you know. But obviously, this knowledge and like knowing this, it comes from being in the industry, where a lot of the people that have criticisms about vaping and about these problems, right? They're not in the industry. They're only looking at it from an hour perspective.
And the news doesn't share any of this.
No, and the news doesn't. Yeah, that's why. So when we did this, we did the CBS thing. So CBS said we're doing a segment on Puff Bar. It's going to be like a 10-minute segment, like 60 minutes kind of style. Would you guys like to be interviewed for this segment? And at this point, we're like, there's so much like negative and false misinformation, you know, around our brand, around us, that it's like, okay, like, yeah, you guys are going to say whatever you're going to say, but at least like I want to have a voice behind some of the questions that you're going to have. I know you might skew it and you might like twist things a little bit, but at least like it'll be our voice, and we're always going to make sure to stay true and positive to what we're saying, you know? So they had brought us on, but talking with them, you know, we kept bringing up this counterfeit issue, kind of like what we're discussing now, and how crazy it is. You know, they didn't know about DH Gate. You know, they didn't know about Alibaba. They had brought out like puff bars and like, look at these like 4 flavors, and it was like strawberry banana. They have like gummy something, and I'm like, they're like, what do you think about these? And they're like, I'm like, oh, those are fake. They're like, oh, really? How do you know? And it's like, what do you mean? How do I know? Like, like we know what flavors we came out with. Like, those are even flavors that we came out with, you know, and even the imagery on there. Because what a lot of these counterfeits do is they had taken the Puff Bar brand and then they just built their own products. So they came out with their own flavors that we had never made, because we had been on the market. We off the market, like we weren't innovating anything, you know. So they were innovating on our behalf, but like not authorized.
Yeah.
So they're coming out with their own devices and stuff like that. I mean, there was crazy flavors. It was like Mountain Dew flavor, and it was like Monster flavor, and it had like actually a can of Monster. Like, you think I'd put a can of Monster on our devices, like a can of Red Bull on our devices to represent the flavor? No, you know. So towards the end of the interview, they were even very curious. They're like, oh, this counterfeit issue, like really, they were like kind of like interested. And I was like explaining. So there's also a lot of black market stuff that goes on in the disposable world, in the vaping world. The vaping world doesn't come from, because what happened was it blew up, and then the people tried to survive, but it was still ran so black market and so under the radar, the vaping industry, when it first came around, that a lot of that lingered, and it's still kind of lingering a little bit, you know. Like there's like devices now, Flume and Hype Bar, and like all these big devices that are coming up. Like
they were after you guys, right? Hype and Flume, or were they around?
No, they were after us. Yeah, they were after us.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, most of the brands now have been after us. There was like, I don't know of any brand that was on the market, you know, before. I mean, the only one is like Soren. They came out with their what's called an Air Bar. Soren was around, you know, for a while, but their disposable wasn't around until way later. But yeah, I mean, like these disposables, I mean, like, good luck finding out who the owner is behind any of these. Yeah. Like I dare anybody here to go. It's because there's no organization behind that. There's no customer support line where you're like calling Hype support and be like, hey, my device, you know, there's no like any of that. You know, it's just all done white labeled, imported from China in the way that I told you it's imported through shell companies and all this stuff. So there's a lot of that also gives bad misrepresentation onto the industry as well. But yeah, I mean, so that's a big that was a big problem for us. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the CBS thing initially to like bring it back.
Yes, yeah. So sorry, we were talking about all of that, and then that was kind of intriguing to them because that was something that they weren't really aware of. So New York, for example, has a flavor ban, so you can't have any flavors in New York
At all.
You know, but it's interesting because on our site, the second most search volume that we get from states is New York, specifically New York. But it's interesting because I was there recently. I've been there maybe like 3 times in the past like 2 months. So I'll stop by like smoke shops and be like, where's like, you know, because you walk in and you don't see the puff bars. And I'm like, okay, well, why are we getting so much traffic from New York? But like, so you go into any smoke shop in New York and you go, oh, do you guys carry puff bar? The guy's like, pulls out a little flavor card, and he goes, this is the flavors we have. And it's like a long list of flavors, and you're like, okay, let me see. And he goes, yeah, he pulls it underneath and does it, you know. So it's like that.
Are they real?
No, they're not real. None of them are real. No, I mean, at this point in time, like unless they have like the sticker that it's like an orange sticker that's like it's called like our Puff DNA, and it's all tobacco-free nicotine. So the warning label says tobacco-free nicotine. If it doesn't have that on there, everything is fake. And at this point, up until this point, it was like 95% of the market's fake, counterfeit. And we knew that since we would have people go into try to authenticate their products now, and we could see compared to how many authentic products are being authenticated compared to like how many fake products are being like tried to be authenticated. So all these fakes, black market. I mean, these fakes are coming from somewhere, right? Someone's importing them, someone's distributing it to them. You know, so that's a lot of like where the problems lie in the vaping industry, right? It's not like us as a brand when we're trying to do it the right way and we're trying to build all these infrastructures in place to compete with the product at the level of like Juul and Views, where they have, you know, tons of money and they have like endless pockets to be able to put like programs in place. We're trying to be at that level with them because we have the same consumer demand as Juul. In the sense of like you look at Google search trends, it's like Puff Bar and Juul. Like we own all the West Coast. Juul owns like the majority of the East Coast in terms of like the search demand or search volume demand. But I mean, Juul at one point was 34 billion, you know, and like we weren't. So it's tough because you're trying to compete at that level, but you're not like competing at, you know, with the same, you know, tools.
Right.
But we're trying to get to that point, but it's tough when people don't understand that a lot of the issues that they have with us shouldn't be with us. It should be with, you know, the government having lack restrictions, as well as these counterfeiters and you know, various things like that. So that with the CBS thing, that was like a huge thing that they were like, oh, like, yeah, counterfeits, we didn't know about like this really, you know, and like we would love to like really expand on that issue or whatever the case is. But yeah, I mean, that's really kind of like where all the problems lie in with the teen issues. If someone's willing to like not sell, if someone's continuing or willing to sell flavors in a state or a city that's not allowing flavors, what's to say they're not willing to sell to, you know, kids, for example?
True.
So I mean, we're trying to get ahead of the issue. A lot of it is, like I said, working with the shops, working with retailers, really getting on that. We're working with a company they're working on a sensor technology for schools and vaping bathrooms or bathrooms where kids will vape.
Oh, interesting.
So what it does is it looks like a sensor like that, and it detects vapor particles in the air.
Oh.
So what happens is it sets it off.
So you're working with that company? Yeah,
we're working with the company to like sponsor. So they've already developed the technology. But they're in the beta testing phase. So we're looking to help them, you know, with some cost and getting it into certain places with that technology. So we could see if it's going to be something that's going to help schools and places that don't allow vaping to detect, you know, so it's like it'll set off an alarm if like kids are vaping in the bathroom or whatever. You know, it's no camera that they're going to put in there. But it helps with that issue a lot. So, I mean, there's things that we're trying to do to help with that issue, but it's very hard when, you know, you're trying to deal with so many different things, you know, and it's like trying to budget for these different things, you know, and we're trying to scale our production up. We're trying to scale, you know, the internal infrastructure up. But yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting issue to try to tackle.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine. So we're kind of running low on time, but so the last thing I guess I will ask you is to kind of piggyback off that. So you've highlighted what you guys want to do, when you've highlighted like some of the plans in place, like what you just mentioned, and it sounds good to me. I mean, again, even coming in, like you don't have to convince me. I was already on board with what you guys were doing, but to me, what I'm thinking is like and I would imagine you feel the same way. It's an uphill battle, like in terms of you. I already don't think you guys are doing anything wrong, but now you're trying to remedy things that are not in your control. But to me, it's like I'm like, but how do you, as even like working with that company to put the sensor in the bathrooms for kids schools, but then how do you still educate people about this misconception, the whole thing of vaping is targeting kids? Because you see I'm sure you've seen like those nationwide TV campaigns where kids are vaping and then it's in black and white. It's very dramatic. It makes kids moody. I remember this one. We would laugh about it. It was like vaping makes kids moody, or it's the nicotine or the tobacco, whatever gets them upset. And it's like showing like some kids having dinner with his parents and the kids being all attitudey and the parents like, what's wrong with you? He like goes, slams his door, like takes out his vape pen. I'm like, dude, this is such a dramatic, gross way to represent
and that's their goal,
But then how do you again, like you mentioned, like you guys aren't what Juul was in terms of like the financial where they were valued at. These companies, like, well, I don't know, companies, the organizations, whatever that are running like the anti-vape stuff. How do you ultimately fight that effectively enough where like you feel you fully dug out of that misconception? I don't know if there's a way fully.
And that's the toughest thing to grasp sometimes. It's like, and I always tell people, you either love us or you hate us, right? Like you hate us, it's going to be very hard for us to change your mind because you're already so stuck on like this and everything.
Is it worth trying at that point?
I mean, it's always worth trying in my opinion, because as long as you're trying, you're doing something positive to like for the industry, for the brand, for the longevity of the industry. I mean, vaping isn't going anywhere. I always tell people this. It is not going anywhere because it is shown to so during the PMTA process, so our legal team, they work for and they represent a bunch of different big brands in the industry. And part of the PMTA, they had worked with labs to do the toxicology reports on the vaping. They had done one study where it was like they took drags of cigarette smoke and they took drags of vaping smoke. The toxicology report had shown that there was 97% less carcinogens in a vapor smoke than there was a smoking, like an actual cigarette smoke, which is huge. I think last year there was like 480,000 deaths in the United States.
From smoking cigarettes?
From smoking cigarettes. If you could cut that down by 97%, if you just go off of that toxicology report, that's huge. Like that's not going anywhere. I mean, like why would you want to go anywhere if that case? It's like if it's saving so many lives. So I think the problem is that it's going to keep evolving to the point where it's like it's going to get just so highly regulated. The black market is another thing that is not going anywhere.
I think I don't know how you.
And I think that's the biggest concern is that they think that they take us down, no kids are going to vape.
Well, like I said, look at what happened in New York when you went there.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Look at the brands now. So technically, all tobacco, unless you have a marketing order from the FDA, because the deadline had passed and the extension had passed unless you have a marketing order from the FDA, your product is technically illegal. Like you're not allowed to sell the tobacco-derived product on the market unless you have a marketing order in terms of vaping juice. All the disposables that you see, they're all tobacco-derived. So it's like, yeah, like that is what's happening is that like you take us off the market, someone that's trying to do it legitimate, you're going to allow for all the black market because obviously you guys don't have the manpower to enforce all of this because you guys would have done it already. So that's a lot of where the problem is that, their solution is not the right solution. I think their head is in the right place, right? Like they don't want kids to vape.
Sure.
That's a good, I think that's an issue we could all stand behind. Sure. But where the conflict is that you're pointing the fingers at the wrong people, the people that are trying to help. Because the thing is like, we're obviously going to represent our users and we're going to do what's best for us in this industry and for the industry. That's just the fact of the matter is like, right? Like I chose to be in this industry and provide a vaping product. So I'm going to fight for the consumers that I feel benefit off of that. Right. But I also understand the child underage, kid issue. And I'm willing to stand behind that as well, but they want both. They don't want me to be around and they don't want kids vaping, So it's got to be this thing where you got to align somewhere because that's like an unrealistic view because vaping isn't going anywhere. And the black market's not going anywhere. I'll tell you that, I mean, like look at counterfeits from Louis Vuitton and Gucci still come in here and think about how much money they have to fight counterfeits, It's crazy. So it's tough because like how you're really going to win this battle is working with the companies to put things in place to where you're making sure that they're being responsible rather than just trying to get rid of these companies. And that's what they want. They just want you to get rid of these companies, So that's really, I mean, that's the solution is that we really just got to come together on, they have to trust our industry insight really is because we know like how these products are ending up. I could tell you, it's like we never sold to an underage user. Like no one ever went to like a puff bar smoke shop or like a pop-up shop or like no one walked into a puff bar store and like bought copious amounts of like Puff Bar. You know what I'm saying? Like it's people got Puff Bar, but they never got it directly from us. I don't know where they got it from, but it didn't come directly from the brand. So it always had to come from another hand. You know, it's like, so why isn't that hand to blame? Why is it us?
Yeah.
You know, and it's because of our flavors are enticing. Well, like again, it goes back to the alcohol thing. Well, I don't see the outrage there.
Yep.
So it's like at least be consistent with your logic if you're going to go after these vices, you know?
Yeah. And that's the initial most obvious counter argument from my perspective is, then why do we draw the line here? What about the flavored Cirocs and the flavored this and the flavored all of that? Those are colorful too. I mean, it's not just kids that like colors. I mean, if I look at that, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna guess that maybe I'm a bubblegum strawberry.
And that's what I told CBS. I was like, when you go to a bar or like any place that has alcohol, right, and you see adults drinking, are all the adults just drinking
Grape
like
or whatever,
like tequila straight up, vodka straight up, you know, whiskey straight up? No, like that's
Adios, it's blue. You have this pink razzle dazzle.
Yeah,
whatever.
you have margaritas, Cosmos, you know, like all these different drinks that have flavors in them because people like flavors. You know, it's like that's a thing. Like people love their devices to have a little flavor to them, or like, you know, their products to have a little flavor to them. You know,
coffee, you put hazelnut, whatever, you put something to again add that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's crazy to think too. You know, people always say like people are addicted. People are addicted. What's another addictive substance that is sold in mass quantities where no one bats an eye?
Caffeine.
It's caffeine, right? It's like you go to Starbucks and you're getting your iced latte, and you could buy, as a kid, you know, you could buy, in a lot of ways too, caffeine and nicotine are very similar in how they affect the body. You know, they both increase your blood pressure. Yeah. They both, you know, kind of are stimulants in a way. They both have addictive properties if you know, use them for over amount of time. Like I know I drink a lot of coffee, and I had stopped one time for like, I had the worst headaches and I was like fatigued, and it was like pretty intense actual withdrawals, you know, from caffeine. I'm nothing that was like putting me out, but it was like, I was like still, you know. So, I mean, but that product is like, no one bats an eye at like having like to put like a warning label in like on a Starbucks coffee cup, like warning, this product contains caffeine. Caffeine is an addictive chemical. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of like, and that's always what we're fighting, is that there's always like a lot of mislogic or illogic in the industry when it's compared to other things. Cause it's like, they want us to solve all these problems, but it's like, we want to solve them too, but like, it's like, you guys are being illogical. Like, how do you want us to solve these? You know, like, well, help us brainstorm, you know? And a lot of that is we've worked with the FDA before to like try to get these counterfeits off the market. The CDTFA, we've worked with them to help get all of the counterfeits off the market. But you know, like a lot of these governments, they don't have the manpower to do it. And that's the problem, is they try to do it at a regulatory level, but really it needs to be like at an enforcement level down here on the ground, like people on the ground, boots on the ground kind of thing. Because at a regulation level, people are just going to go around the law. Like just like here in Glendale, there's a flavor ban. I go in every smoke shop here. There's flavors.
Yep.
You know?
That's because like I was mentioning, I don't live here anymore, and I was at a smoke shop the other day, and I saw a bunch of flavored stuff, and I went to my friend's house after. I was like, wait, are they allowed to sell these now, or like what's the deal? So I mean, there you go, you answered the question. But
yeah, they don't care. I mean, because where's the enforcement?
Yeah,
like, you know, I mean, like, I don't know what the fine is for getting caught or whatever the case is, but
you guys are the bad guy.
Yeah, you know, for sure. And that's what happens, is that we get the flack, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think it's tough too, and I think a lot of it too is it's tough too because people have deemed disposables as puff bars. Like it's almost like it's like an
Kleenex,
like it's an adjective,
Kleenex,
like the Kleenex or whatever the case is, you know. So it's very tough because there was like that survey that came out that the FDA does this like youth tobacco survey, and Puff Bar was 40%. I think they interviewed like 20,000 or 2,000 kids, something like that.
Puff Bar was their favorite or something.
And it was like out of all the brands, it was like Puff Bar was 40% majority of the favorite. Juul was like, I think like 26, 28, and Views was like 15. You know, broke down. But it's tough too because they're like, oh, see, Puff Bar is like the favorite, right? But it's tough because it's like if you have a survey in front of like a bunch of youth, right? And it's like, okay, you have like these 5 brands on there, like Views, Enjoy, Juul, and Puff Bar, and whatever other brand, right? It's like, oh, Puff Bar, yeah, like I use Puff Bar, but they could be using any disposable device, but they're just like, oh, Puff Bar, yeah, I know Puff Bar. You know, where Juul and Views are very specific devices, you know, where disposables are kind of like just deemed as like Puff Bars.
Yeah.
So it's also tough too because now we're having to answer for this thing where it's like, Puff Bars might not be the most popular amongst teens right now. You know, it might be like a different brand.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, And we're getting hit for that because, you know, we're just the biggest name and we are the first to market really with these kind of products.
That's where like that brand kind of comes back to. It like ends up biting you guys.
And it ends up biting us. You know, we have friends in the industry all the time. They're like, I feel so sorry for you guys taking all the like the shit for like everything, all the problems that are really not like under your control. And you guys are like, all these brands are willing to like are operating in the dark, right? Like Flume is like a big one that's been popping up recently.
Yeah.
Like they're huge. Like I know their production numbers and they're just pumping out tons of volume, you know. No, I've never heard anything of Flume from like anybody, you know. It's like even in interviews and stuff like that, no one brings any of the other brands up.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like it sucks because they're like, oh, cool, like yeah, we'll let Puff Bar take all the heat and we'll just like operate over here and we'll keep operating, you know, but we're the ones taking the blunt of the force. I mean, there's congressmen that have written like nasty letters, like horrible letters to the FDA. Like there was like that Chris Rumaruthi or whatever. His letters are just like insanely ignorant. And he's just like, the way he writes his letters to the FDA is like, the Puff Bar and the founders and owners behind Puff Bar are enriching themselves, selling their vile products to kids. Like that's literally how he's writing these like letters. And I'm like, geez, like you're making it sound like some like monsters.
And
like,
I'm sure he's clean-handed politician.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So stupid.
I'm sure, you know, so, and it's tough too. But yeah, no, it's just like really just trying to find the angles. And I think it's just really getting out and talking about these things is really going to help us, you know, like people hearing this and really letting them know the truth behind what's kind of going on behind the scenes is going to help us, I think, in the end.
Yeah, man. I mean, I wish you guys the best, and I'm glad you guys are back on the market. And I hope these initiatives you've discussed, you guys are trying to take, I hope they work out, man. Because like you said, I don't know the faces of any other one that are in the space you guys are in. So the fact that you and your partner are, you know, actively trying to work with the FDA, actively trying to do these things to try and bring awareness to, you know, that we're not pro teenagers smoking our stuff.
Yeah.
And we're in fact trying to do XYZ to counterfeit, you know, to combat it with all this counterfeit issues and stuff too. So it sounds like you guys are doing, not that it just sounds, you guys are doing the right things. And
yeah,
it's just that, again, you guys are fighting an uphill battle. So I wish you guys the best of luck, man.
No, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, and I appreciate you having us on.
Of course. So, I mean, I was going to, before you even mentioned you guys don't have the social, I was going to say, where can people find you guys? But I guess it's just the website.
It's just puffbar.com. Yeah, that's the best source of information, you know.
All right,
there's so many fake websites too.
Yeah.
So just puffbar.com.
Because I was checking on Instagram, see if you guys had Instagram, and I saw a bunch of like wholesale distributor with this, that.
Yeah.
Puff Bar Turkey, Puff Bar Armenia, Puff Bar Mexico.
Yeah.
Jesus, man. This is
all
over
and everyone's kind of like poached on the brand while we took a hiatus, which has been the biggest problem. But yeah, it's good to know that like eventually like we're letting people know that this is where you get authentic is puffbar.com, and our new authentication system.
Yeah.
Will
so that's where people can find it. So again, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much, man.